The Vatican holds countless secrets, but none so profound as a machine that could conquer time, a device that could witness any moment in the past, from the speeches of ancient Rome to the Crucifixion of Christ. It was called the Chronovisor, and its existence has been one of history's most fiercely debated secrets. To understand the legend of the Chronovisor, one must first understand the man at its center, Father Pellegrino Ernetti. He was not a simple parish priest. By every account, he was a man of profound and conflicting genius, a figure who seemed to belong to two different centuries at once. Publicly, he was a Benedictine monk, living a life of structured piety on the serene Venetian island of San Giorgio Maggiore, a place steeped in ancient art and quiet contemplation. Within this clerical life, he was a world-renowned academic and a scientist. His formal expertise was in a field so niche it was almost mystical itself: archaic music. He was one of the planet's leading authorities on pre-polyphonic music, the lost single-line melodies of the ancient world. He spent decades attempting to reconstruct these sounds from decaying manuscripts, a process that was part science, part archaeology, and part art. But his other, more private passion was for the new frontier of quantum physics. He was fascinated by the subatomic world, by the strange and ghostly principles that governed reality at its most fundamental level. This duality is the absolute key to the story. He was a man who sought to hear the lost voices of the past while simultaneously studying a science that suggested the past might not be truly lost at all. The story of the Chronovisor's creation does not begin in a dusty attic, but in the white-hot crucible of the post-war era. The 1950s were a time of unprecedented scientific upheaval. Humanity had split the atom, unleashing a power that was both divine and demonic. The Soviets had launched Sputnik, conquering the heavens. Science was performing miracles that, for centuries, had been the sole province of God. For an ancient institution like the Vatican, this new world presented a terrifying challenge. How could faith hold its ground against a tide of empirical, technological proof? According to the legend, the Vatican chose not to fight science, but to secretly co-opt it for the ultimate purpose. The tale, which first exploded into public consciousness in a 1972 edition of the Italian newspaper La Domenica del Corriere, claimed that Father Ernetti was hand-picked to lead a secret project. This was not his personal hobby. It was a clandestine think tank, a secret society of 12 of the world's most brilliant minds, operating with the full, albeit hidden, blessing and funding of the Holy See. Their mission was nothing less than to build a device that could provide final, irrefutable empirical evidence of the Gospels. Ernetti was always deliberately vague about who exactly was on this team, citing pacts of secrecy. But he let two names slip, names so powerful they gave the entire story a terrifying weight of possibility. The first was Enrico Fermi, the Italian Nobel laureate often called the Pope of Physics, and a chief architect of the world's first nuclear reactor. His alleged involvement meant the project had access to the deepest understanding of matter and energy in existence. The second name was Wernher von Braun, the German rocket scientist who had built the V2 rocket for the Nazis before becoming the celebrated mind who took America to the moon. His supposed presence meant the project had the engineering genius to turn impossible theory into functioning hardware. The team size 12 was also no coincidence, echoing the 12 apostles of Christ, a perfect fusion of scientific endeavor and holy mission. The device this team allegedly built was not a time machine in the classic sense. It could not send a person hurtling through the fourth dimension. Its function was arguably more elegant and certainly more terrifying in its implications. The Chronovisor did not take you to the past, it brought the past to you. Father Ernetti's explanation for its function was a masterful piece of scientific storytelling, weaving together established physics with daring, speculative leaps into the unknown. The foundation of his theory was a core principle of physics, that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it only changes form. Ernetti reasoned that every event that has ever occurred, every word ever spoken, every sight ever seen, created a unique burst of energy. Light waves and sound waves radiated out from every single moment in history. While these waves become infinitely faint over time, He argued that they never truly disappear. They leave behind a permanent, residual echo, an energetic ghost imprinted on the very structure of space-time. He believed that all of human history was, in effect, still happening all around us, just in a form too faint and scattered for our senses to perceive. The Chronovisor, then, was the ultimate antenna, designed to receive and reassemble these historical ghosts. Ernetti described it as a large cabinet made of polished wood and metal, containing a complex array of dials, levers, and a cathode ray tube screen, much like an early television. The heart of the machine, he claimed, was a set of 3 specialized antennas. These were not ordinary receivers. They were supposedly crafted from a mysterious, secret alloy of gold, silver, and copper, metals with both high conductivity and deep alchemical significance. This antenna array was the key. It was allegedly able to tune into the specific, unique frequency of a past event, isolating it from the endless cosmic noise of history. The process was described as painstaking. The team couldn't simply flip a switch. They had to perform complex calculations to dial in the exact temporal and spatial coordinates of the event they wished to see. They were, in effect, filtering the entire history of the universe. Ernetti even connected this to his work in music, citing a principle he called the disaggregation of sound. Just as he could scientifically break down and reconstruct a lost ancient melody from its scattered harmonics, he claimed the Chronovisor could reassemble the scattered light and sound energy of a past moment. Furthermore, Ernetti blended this physics with a touch of the metaphysical. He proposed that events of great emotional or spiritual power, a passionate speech by Cicero, a lost play by Quintus Ennius, or the ultimate event, the Crucifixion of Christ, emitted a far more potent and durable form of energy. He believed that the human soul itself was a type of energetic transmitter. This meant that the most important moments in history were also the easiest to find. The Chronovisor was therefore not just a machine of science, but a tool for witnessing the soul of history itself, played back on a screen. For a machine of such infinite power, a claim of its existence would never be enough. The world would demand proof, and Father Ernetti knew it. He and his team had allegedly witnessed countless moments, from the founding of Rome to the downfall of Napoleon. But these were merely tests, calibrations for the machine's ultimate purpose. Their final target was the single most pivotal event in the history of Western civilization, the moment upon which the entire Christian faith rests, the Passion of the Christ. And on the 2nd of May 1972, the world was shown the alleged fruit of their labor. It appeared in a popular Italian weekly magazine, La Domenica del Corriere. The article was titled, "A Machine That Photographs the Past Has Finally Been Invented," and it featured a grainy black and white image that sent a shockwave across the globe. It was a photograph of a man's face. Seen in profile, the man was bearded, with long hair, his eyes closed, and his head tilted slightly upwards. His expression was one of profound, heartbreaking agony, yet also a strange, transcendent peace. This, Father Ernetti claimed, was the true and literal face of Jesus Christ, photographed by the Chronovisor as he died on the cross. This was not a painting. It was not an artist's interpretation filtered through centuries of cultural bias and artistic license. It was presented as a raw, unedited frame from history itself, a piece of photojournalism from an event that occurred nearly 2,000 years prior. The details were mesmerizing. You could see the texture of the skin, the faint lines of sorrow etched around the eyes. For believers, it was a moment of staggering vindication. Here was the face of their Savior, not as imagined by Da Vinci or Michelangelo, but as he truly was, captured in his final, most human moments. The implications were almost too vast to comprehend. If the photograph was real, it was the most important artifact in existence. It was empirical, scientific proof of the Gospels. It would end all debate, silence all skeptics, and transform faith into established fact. The Vatican would possess a direct window into its own origins, a tool to verify its most sacred stories. Ernetti claimed they had not only captured still images but had witnessed the entire crucifixion. He spoke of hearing the crowd's jeers, the sound of the hammer blows, and Christ's final words, spoken not in the polished Greek of the New Testament, but in the coarse, everyday Aramaic of his time, the photograph was just a single, terrible and beautiful frame from this celestial transmission. It was the ultimate evidence, and it demanded that the world either accept an impossible truth or expose an unthinkable lie. While the photograph of Christ was the Chronovisor's most explosive revelation, it was not the only evidence Father Ernetti presented to a fascinated public. To bolster the credibility of his fantastic claims, he asserted that the team had used the device to observe and document numerous other historical events, focusing particularly on moments that had been lost to time. These were not merely casual observations. In one case, they resulted in the alleged recovery of a complete work of art that scholars had believed to be gone forever. The most significant of these was the complete text of Thyestes, a lost tragic play by Quintus Ennius, the man universally considered to be the father of Roman poetry. Before the Chronovisor, all that remained of this masterpiece were a few scattered lines quoted by other ancient authors like Cicero and Varro. Its full plot, a gruesome tale of betrayal, murder, and cannibalism, was known only in summary. It was one of the great lost treasures of classical literature. Father Ernetti claimed that he and his team had tuned the Chronovisor to a performance of the play in Rome in the year 169 BC. He said they had not only watched it, but had meticulously transcribed the entire play, word for word, from beginning to end. This was a staggering claim. It was one thing to say you had seen a ghost of the past, but it was another entirely to produce a full, tangible manuscript from the ether. The alleged text of Thyestes was published, a concrete piece of evidence that could be analyzed by classicists and linguists. It was a direct challenge to the academic world. If the text was authentic, it would be a discovery on par with finding a new set of Dead Sea Scrolls. It meant the Chronovisor was not just a viewer, but a tool of cultural and historical resurrection. Alongside this monumental recovery, Ernetti spoke of witnessing other key moments in Roman history. He described tuning the device to the Roman Senate in the year 63 BC. There he claimed to have watched the great orator Marcus Tullius Cicero deliver his first fiery speech against the conspirator Catiline. Ernetti reported on the details with the clarity of an eyewitness, describing Cicero's gestures, his impassioned tone, the shifting reactions of the senators, some gripped by his rhetoric, others shrinking in fear. These were not the dry facts of a history book. They were living, breathing moments, allegedly retrieved from the past by their incredible machine. By presenting these less spiritually charged, more academic proofs, Ernetti was building a foundation. He was attempting to show that the Chronovisor was a serious scientific instrument, its power demonstrated and verified on secular history before it was ever aimed at the divine. An object of supposed divine origin and infinite importance, like the photograph of Christ, was never going to be accepted on faith alone. It was far too significant. In the weeks and months following its publication, the grainy image was subjected to an unprecedented level of scrutiny by a global army of skeptics, journalists, art historians, and forensic analysts. The very power of the claim demanded an equally powerful investigation, and as they zoomed in, sharpened the contrast, and scoured the archives, they began to find inconsistencies that could not be ignored. But the true fatal blow to the photograph's authenticity did not come from a high-tech lab, but from the keen eye of a reader who had seen that face before. The unraveling began in earnest when a French journal dedicated to paranormal phenomena published a reader's letter. The reader pointed out that the supposed photograph of Christ bore an uncanny resemblance to a wooden crucifix sculpted by a Spanish artist named Lorenzo Colau Valliera. This was not some ancient, obscure artifact. It was a 20th century work of art. The specific sculpture in question was housed in the Sanctuary of Merciful Love in Collevalenza, a town in the Italian province of Perugia. Suddenly, the debate had a new concrete piece of evidence to consider. A physical object that could be photographed and compared directly to Ernetti's Chronovisor image. The comparison was damning. When a photograph was taken of the Colau Valliera sculpture, the similarities were immediately obvious. But the final, irrefutable proof came when investigators realized that Ernetti's image was simply a photograph of the sculpture's face, but flipped horizontally, a simple darkroom trick. Once reversed to its original orientation, the two images were not just similar, they were identical, every detail aligned with mathematical precision. The angle of the head, the sorrowful parting of the lips, the specific way the strands of hair fell across the brow, the shadows cast by the nose and cheekbones. It was a perfect one-to-one match. There was no room left for interpretation or debate. This was not a case of two artists having a similar vision of Christ. This was a case of direct photographic reproduction. The Chronovisor had not captured an image of Christ on the cross in the year 33 AD. It, or rather someone, had simply taken a close-up photograph of a modern wooden statue in Italy. This single, undeniable discovery shattered the core of Ernetti's evidence. The entire story, which had teetered on the brink of being the greatest revelation in human history, now seemed poised to collapse into one of the most audacious hoaxes ever conceived. If the photograph was a lie, a deliberate and easily exposed fabrication, then what did that say about the rest of Ernetti's claims? The machine, the team, the lost plays. Everything was now poisoned by this single, foundational deception. The exposure of the photograph as a fake should have been the end of the Chronovisor story. For many it was, but the tale refused to die, largely because of the enigmatic silence of its central figure and the conflicting stories that emerged in his final years. After the debunking, Father Ernetti largely withdrew from the public spotlight. The Vatican, for its part, maintained a confounding official silence. It never endorsed the Chronovisor, but it also never formally sanctioned Father Ernetti for what appeared to be a massive, faith-damaging public fraud. This lack of a definitive statement from the Church allowed a space for doubt and mystery to continue to grow. Ernetti lived out the rest of his life at his monastery, passing away in 1994 and taking, it seemed, the final truth with him to the grave. But the story did not end there. After his death, a narrative emerged that added yet another layer of complexity to the legend. This account came primarily from one of Hervet's friends, a French priest named François Brune, who had long been a believer in the Chronovisor. According to Brune, Father Ernetti did make a confession on his deathbed, but it was a confession full of nuance and shocking assertions. Ernetti supposedly admitted that the photograph of Christ was indeed a fake. He also admitted that the transcribed text of the lost play Thyestes was not a literal transcript from the past, but rather his own brilliant reconstruction based on his unparalleled expertise. However, according to this version of events, Ernetti adamantly refused to confess that the Chronovisor itself was a hoax. He allegedly maintained until his final breath that the machine was absolutely real. He explained that he had faked the evidence out of a sort of pious desperation. The real images produced by the Chronovisor, he claimed, were hazy, indistinct, like old, faded photographs, and he feared they would not be convincing enough for the public. So he created clearer, more dramatic proofs to help the world believe in the machine's true power. He further claimed that shortly after these public revelations, the project was shut down. The small group of scientists, terrified by what they had created, voluntarily dismantled the Chronovisor. The device, he insisted, was now hidden away, perhaps deep within the Vatican's vaults, deemed far too dangerous and destabilizing for humanity to ever use again. This account, however, is not the only one. Years later, another piece of evidence surfaced, a supposed written statement, allegedly penned by Ernetti himself before his death and provided by an anonymous relative. This document was a full, unambiguous retraction. In it, the author states clearly that there was no secret team, no Enrico Fermi, no Werner von Braun, there was no machine. The entire Chronovisor story, from beginning to end, was a complete fabrication. It was a lie he had created, and he was now confessing it in full. But the authenticity of this document is fiercely debated. Supporters of the Chronovisor legend claim it is a forgery, created to finally discredit the story and protect the Vatican. Skeptics see it as the final logical conclusion to the affair. And so, even in his death, Father Ernetti left behind a perfect paradox. Did he confess to faking the evidence for a real machine? Or did he confess to faking everything? The lack of a single verifiable final word ensures that the question remains, suspended forever between a fantastic truth and a masterful lie. Even with a debunked photograph and a series of contradictory deathbed confessions, the story of the Chronovisor did not fade away. In fact, in the decades since Father Ernetti's death, the legend has only grown stronger, mutating and evolving as it spreads across the globe. It has become a modern myth, a piece of technological folklore that seems perfectly engineered to survive in an age of skepticism and conspiracy. The question is no longer just about the evidence. It is about why this particular story holds such a powerful and lasting grip on the human imagination. The endurance of the myth comes down to its profound appeal to a fundamental human desire, the desire for certainty. In a world of competing beliefs, shifting politics, and historical ambiguity, the Chronovisor offers the promise of an absolute, final truth. It represents a way to answer the unanswerable questions that lie at the heart of our civilizations. What really happened at the crucifixion? What were the true words of the great philosophers? What did lost cities and vanished cultures actually look like? The Chronovisor is a key to a celestial library containing every book that was never written and every moment that was never recorded. This promise is so potent that for many, the desire for it to be true outweighs the evidence suggesting it is not. Furthermore, the story is constructed like a perfect conspiracy theory. It has an enigmatic and brilliant protagonist, a powerful and secretive organization in the Vatican, and a world-changing secret. Crucially, the story contains its own defense mechanisms. The claim that the device was dismantled and hidden away by the Vatican is a masterstroke of narrative design. It perfectly explains the complete lack of any physical evidence. How can you prove the machine doesn't exist if its non-existence is part of the story? The Vatican's steadfast official silence on the matter only adds fuel to this fire. To a skeptic, this silence is proof the story is beneath notice. To a believer, it is the exact behavior one would expect from an institution desperately trying to guard the most dangerous secret in history. The rise of the internet has acted as a massive amplifier for the legend. The Chronovisor story is perfectly suited for the digital age, where compelling narratives spread far faster and wider than meticulous academic debunkings. It thrives in online forums, on late-night radio shows, and in video essays, passed from one curious mind to another. Each retelling adds a new layer of speculation, a new supposed insider detail. The story has broken free of its origins and now lives a life of its own, a self-perpetuating myth that is constantly being rediscovered by new generations. It persists not because of proof, but because it is a story that touches upon our deepest hopes about faith, our deepest fears about technology, and our endless fascination with the secrets of the past. So where does this leave us? After journeying through the fantastic claims, the startling evidence, the thorough debunkings, and the conflicting confessions, we are left standing before a mystery with three possible doors. The final answer depends entirely on which door one chooses to open. The first door is the door of the hoax. This is the simplest and most rational explanation, the one supported by the available evidence. Through this door, we see Father Pellegrino Ernetti as a man of immense, perhaps frustrated, genius, a brilliant academic and scientist who, for reasons of his own, perhaps a misguided desire to bolster faith, or perhaps simply a desire for recognition, concocted one of the most elaborate and compelling scientific frauds of the 20th century. The proof for this is clear. The photograph of Christ was a direct copy of a modern sculpture, and the other pieces of evidence, like the text of Thyestes, withered under expert scrutiny. The final, written confession, if authentic, is the final nail in the coffin. The Chronovisor was never a machine of metal and wires. It was a machine of the mind, built from imagination and deceit. The second door is the door of the hidden truth. This is a far darker and more complex path, the one favored by believers and conspiracy theorists. Through this door, we see the Chronovisor as a terrifying reality. We accept Ernetti's claim that the machine was real, but that he faked the evidence to make a classified truth more accessible. The device's power was so absolute, so reality-shattering, that its own creators, including figures like Fermi and von Braun, agreed it must be dismantled and hidden forever. They understood that humanity was not ready for a technology that could eliminate all privacy, destroy all religion, and rewrite all history. In this version, the Vatican is not a victim of a hoax, but the eternal guardian of an unthinkable power, and the debunkings and conflicting confessions are merely pieces of a deliberate disinformation campaign designed to protect us from a truth we cannot handle. And then there is the third door, the door of belief. This door leads not to a simple yes or no, but to a more profound understanding. Through this door, whether the machine was physically real or not becomes almost secondary. The Chronovisor has transcended its own story to become a powerful modern myth. It is a thought experiment that forces us to confront our relationship with faith, science, and the past. The legend itself is the important artifact. It reveals our collective yearning for proof in an age of doubt, our anxieties about the unchecked power of technology, and our romantic desire to believe that the past is never truly lost. In the end, the Chronovisor may be a story that tells us less about what happened 2,000 years ago and more about who we are today. Hoax, truth, or myth? The final verdict remains unwritten, leaving the legend to endure, suspended forever in the space between what can be proven and what we desperately want to believe.